What did the 1936 Graham Crusader and the 1970 Nissan Model 70 have in common? Well, three brothers out of Evansville, Indiana, named Joseph, Robert, and Ray Graham, who I believe are an integral part of American automotive history. Researching them led me down a rabbit hole of automotive history the likes I have never seen. So sit back, put your seatbelt on, and come on a ride with me as we talk about the Graham brothers. So if you're a longtime viewer of this show, you know that we ran into this 1936 Graham Crusader at a small car show back in August. While researching the car for the video, I fell down the aforementioned rabbit hole. So let's take it back a little bit to the beginning of the Graham Brothers Automotive Company.
The year is 1919. World War I has just ended. Women are gaining the right to vote. Prohibition has begun, and we are recovering from the Elaine race riots, later to be known as the Red Summer.
Wow, I was really hoping to start on a more positive note.
Yeah, I don't know why we let them vote either.
That is not what I meant. Anyways, the year was 1919. Coming off the success of their glass manufacturing company, brothers Joseph, Robert, and Ray Graham decided to start creating kits to convert Ford Model Ts into trucks and to modify Ford Model TTs, which were trucks. This led them to an understanding of the automotive manufacturing industry. So with this knowledge and a stockpile of various engines, they set off to creating their own trucks under the Graham Brothers brand name. They settled on using Dodge engines and even began selling them at Dodge dealerships. Their success led them to opening additional plants outside of their hometown in Evansville, Indiana, and expanding to Detroit, Michigan in 1922 and Stockton, California in 1925. So what does any good company do at the time? Well, sell off to a company that's way better off and take cushy jobs at the top. And that's exactly what the brothers did. They sold the truck firm in 1925 to Dodge and took up executive positions in the company, only for the banking syndicate that's in charge of Dodge to begin looking to sell the company, later, of course, selling that to the Chrysler Corporation in 1928. However, the Graham Brothers brand was still produced until 1928 when the sellout was completed. Now, I know I threw out a lot of years at you there, but it is important to point out a couple things. One, these brothers were part of both Ford, one of the largest running companies in the world, but were employed by Dodge as well before it even became part of the Chrysler Corporation. They were there at the beginning, and I just find it amazing that these three dudes from the middle of nowhere, Evansville, Indiana, could become so tied to some of the biggest players in the automotive world. But back to the brothers' story and the formation of the Graham Page Automotive Manufacturing Company.
The year is 1927. Charles Lindbergh just completed a solo flight non-stop across the Big Pond. Sculpting has begun on the faces of Mount Rushmore, and thousands of people drown in the Great Mississippi Flood.
Wait, is there always going to be something terrible lumped in?
Hey, look, kid, I just read this script. You write this thing.
I guess that's fair. Well, at least there isn't a severe global economic downturn on the horizon. So in 1927, our boys, Joey, Bobby, and Ray, purchased the Page Detroit Motor Car Company, makers of the Page and Jouett automobiles. Joey became the president, Bobby the vice, and good old Ray became the secretary treasurer of the company. And they got to producing a line of cars under the Graham Page name. They were also a little naughty by creating a line of trucks until Dodge gently reminded them that they had a non-compete when they sold them the original company. But otherwise, things are moving along great for the trio. They quickly became known for their quality, which brought in enough money that they even had enough to dip their toes into racing, which also boosted their sales even higher. You know how the saying goes, win on Sunday, sell on Monday. One thing that really stood out to me about the Graham Page logo is that it features the three brothers with suits of armor on. Like, if I owned my own car brand, I most definitely would put my face on the front of it. That'd be badass.
The year is 1929.
No! Enough of that. I think we all know it's not going to be good. Anyways, as the Great Depression began, our trio were doing all right. Well, duo now. Unfortunately, Ray died in 1932. I could not find details about his death as personal information to the Graham brothers is very hard to find on the internet. In the same year, the remaining brothers hired designer Amos Northup. Now, Amos had already made a name for himself as chief designer for the bodybuilding company Murray Corporation. No, not that kind of bodybuilder. This kind of bodybuilder. He had helped design the Willie 77 and the 1931 Rio Royal 8. But now teamed up with our boys, he churned out the 1932 Graham Blue Streak, the single most influential design in automotive history. So now you might be asking yourself, why? His design introduced something that had never been done before. Enclosed fenders. But seriously, mud and grime would build up excessively on the undercarriages of the vehicles at the time. Still, not a lot of roads, and even less people building them in the Great Depression, so that was a problem too. Along with this, the boys cooked up a new banjo frame. This design put the rear axles through the sides of the frame with a small rubber stoppers to absorb the impact of the axle. Not too dissimilar from like bump stops on modern cars. This fancy new design allowed them to make the body much wider. Other manufacturers would even later copy this very design. Chrysler. But this is truly the beginning of the trend of streamlining, and which I think we can all agree is what led us to the use of aerodynamics in modern cars. In 1934, the boys were chugging along, introducing a new crankshaft-driven supercharger. At first, it was only added to the top-of-the-line 8-cylinder models, but would be later adopted to the 6-cylinder when they dropped the 8-cylinder engine in 1936. During their run of supercharged cars, the Graham brothers actually produced more supercharged cars than any other manufacturer at the time. It only got taken over when Buick took the title in the 1990s. So by the time we get to 1935, the Great Depression is in full swing. The Blue Streak design has become outdated. Even redoing the front and rear ends of the car for 1935 couldn't save them, and honestly may have made the situation worse. Smooth Howley Terrified. Sorry, that was a big one. Having spent all of the remaining money on the redesigns, the boys turned to the Rio Motor Company to purchase car bodies. Graham did add a new front and rear end styling for it and some small details in the body to create his 1936 and 1937 Grahams. Which brings me back to the original question, how is the 1936 Graham Crusader related to the 1970 Nissan Model 70? Now, the details of how this arrangement came to be is a bit foggy. It's possible that an American expat living in Japan by the name of William Gorham may have been the one that had collaborated with Nissan and the Graham brothers. You know, William Gorham, revered as the founder of the Japanese automotive industry and possibly another deep drive video. But it is possible that our boy Joey had already established relationships when he had made a visit on behalf of the glassmaking company Libby Owens Ford. While there, he was introduced to the founder and president of Nissan, Yoshisuke Akiyawa, through the Japanese finance minister. Regardless of how this meeting occurred, it could not have come at a better time for the Graham brothers. Remember how I said they had spent all their money on that new body redesign? Well, they were absolutely broke. So they had sold the rights and the entire production machinery for the Crusader. Like everything that stood in the plant in Detroit, like all of it boxed up, ready and shipped out to the land of the rising sun. The deal resulted in a cool $490,000 in 1930s money, which is about this much in today's money. The only thing that they didn't come with the deal was the Continental engines Graham had used for his. However, he did hook them up with one of the Graham toolings of an older L-head 6-cylinder that he had retired back in 1935. So with the used equipment and an obsolete engine, Nissan got to work in creating the 1937 Nissan Model 70. Except for the aforementioned engine, the car is identical to the Graham Crusader 4-door sedan of the same year. They would continue to build them until 1943, although a bulk of them were made exclusively for the Japanese military.
Well, what would they need that for?
Well, my research says that they were used in the occupation of Manchuria and elsewhere.
Elsewhere?
Yeah, I think you know what's coming. But before we get to that, let's get back to our boys. In 1938, the Graham brothers hit up their old boy Amos to help design a new model. Unfortunately for our boys and Amos, he passed before finishing the design. So other Graham engineers stepped in and finished what Graham dubbed the Spirit of Motion. This design would bring them many prestigious awards, including winning the Concours d'Elegance in Paris, France. I most definitely mispronounced that. Later described by Michael Lamb of Special Interest Autos, the striking leaning into the wind profile copied old racing photographs in which the camera shutter made all fast cars look like they were trying to outrun themselves. Even standing still, the Graham seemed to be moving. However, the design would end up being a huge flop. By most estimates, across all 3 years of its production, the total production numbers would be between 6,000 and 13,000 units. It would later be nicknamed the Shark Nose, which I would wager to bet isn't a great nickname for a car. And with World War II beginning overseas, Graham was running out of options. Late into 1939, Graham made a deal with the Hupp Motor Company. See, Hupp had the dies to build the beautiful Gordon Burig designed Cord 810 and 812. Honestly, I would love one of these cars. They're absolutely beautiful. But Hupp didn't have the cash to actually produce the cars. So Graham agreed to help them build their Huppmobile Skylark in exchange for the rights to use the Cord dies on their own car called the Hollywood. It seemed like Graham had finally found the answer to their financial problems. Orders came pouring in, but due to manufacturing difficulties, they were behind before they even began production. And after waiting so long, most of the customers' orders just got canceled. It ended up being an even bigger flop than old Shark Nose, so much so that Graham suspended manufacturing in September of 1940. They did reopen for military production for World War II, but at what capacity it was involved is very unclear. In 1946, they began automobile production under the new name Fraser. Named so after the new president of Graham Page, Joseph W. Fraser, partnered with Henry J. Kaiser. They began making equipment for farms with a name you may know, rototiller. Although in August of 1945, Graham Page announced the plans to renew the Graham name, it actually never came to fruition. In 1947, the rest of the automotive assets were sold off to Kaiser Fraser, Joseph and Henry's Automobile Company, creators of the Kaiser Jeep. The Graham facilities were sold off to Chrysler, who used it to create the DeSoto and later the Imperial lines. The Graham Company would later drop the motors from its name and branch into other companies like real estate. So that's the story. When I started doing the research for this video, I never expected to find a story like this. These three brothers and the company have been instrumental in creating the modern vehicle as we know it. I'm not so sure they'll ever get the credit for it that they deserve. Their willingness to streamline in a time like the Depression showed a unique ability to predict the future of cars. The blue streak and the spirit of motion may not have been appreciated in their own time, but their striking beauty and elegance enchants even modern car enthusiasts. And their designs have been copied by a lot bigger companies. Guys, they stole everything they had. Sorry. Their designs were copied because they were amazing designs and absolutely ahead of their time.
But speaking of time, we're at our destination, so let me know down in the comments if you like the format of this video and what subjects you'd like me to cover further. I really enjoyed diving into this information, and I can't wait to do it again in the next Chrispy Driver Presents Deep Drives. But if you like this video, smash that like button. If you subscribe, just know that I appreciate it. And until next time, this has been Chrispy Driver, and have a wonderful day.